You are such a genuine gem. Thank you for clicking on my video. I'm Brooke McKenna, but today's case is about an obsessive love triangle turned deadly. Now, when I tell you this case contains so many of the components we see in true crime cases, I think you will still be surprised with how many. From jealous lovers, lies, drugs, a botched crime scene, and so much more, you won't know what's about to happen next. I also want to thank our sponsor, Best Fiends. They are a puzzle adventure game that is an app for your phone that I have really been using to calm my mind lately. They have these adorable little characters that you get while you're solving these puzzles, and it's just so relaxing. What I think is so amazing is that even when you fail a puzzle, it will give you a reward for actually failing just because you're trying. And I think that that's something we all kind of need, is just sometimes getting a reward for trying our best. You know, it's a tough world. But Best Fiends, which is best friends without the R, is completely free to download. And what I have really been loving it for lately is to get my mind away from work when I feel like I have to be working all the time. It's something that I do to distract myself. Giving yourself a mental break is so important, especially right now. And so I really do recommend this game for doing so. I have been absolutely loving it. So if you want to play, download the game for free using my link below to get $5 worth of gold and diamonds for free if you beat level 5. Let me know what level you get up to in the comments down below. I'm playing every single day, trying to get my levels up as high as I possibly can, but I'd love to know what you think of the game. And thank you for Best Fiends for sponsoring this video. Now let's get back to the story. I also want to thank two very important sources I used to find information on this case. That is the Lone Star 187 True Crime Podcast, as well as the book Wasted by Susie Spencer. These both had incredible amounts of information where you could not find any others, so I will have those linked down below. So it was 1995 in Texas, and Regina Hartwell was a 25-year-old woman living in Austin. She had grown up in Pasadena, but she had moved pretty much right after high school and went to Austin. She was actually the only child of Antoinette and her stepfather, Mark. She had grown up kind of only wearing dresses, being very proper per her mother's rules. You see, her mother, Antoinette, actually had MS, and so she was quite a grumpy individual, I would say, and she was quite strict on her daughter, especially about certain rules and how a lady should act. She would kind of take the anger of her own life out on her daughter, and it was even said that she put out cigarettes on Regina as well. Now, Regina would end up being without a mother at all shortly into her life. She was only, I believe, 12 years old when her mother would be involved in a tragic accident. You see, Antoinette had her own company working at airports cleaning the airplanes. So she would go into these airplanes, clean them up, and then wait for the next one. However, one day on the job, nobody could have ever expected that this would happen, but one of the machine operators actually pushed that huge metal plane door back onto her as she was trying to walk out, and she was instantly killed. This was a huge loss for Regina and, you know, her stepfather, Mark, and they really did grieve this loss, but they also tried to live their life as normal as possible. So Mark, even though he was the stepfather, treated her as his own child and continued to love and take care of her. Regina grew up loving pets, loving her friends, and she was someone who was said to have a personality that everyone gravitated towards, no matter if they knew her or not. And she was the type of person who would just walk up to somebody and talk to them. She was outgoing, she was bubbly, and she knew how to make somebody like her, but it was just naturally her doing so. She was also such a giving person, and anything her friends wanted or needed, she would instantly give to them. It was almost to the point of buying love. And as horrible as that sounds, that's kind of how Regina felt she had to be. And so her friends in high school were mainly said to like her due to the fact that she would host these parties at her home, and she would buy all the alcohol, and she would basically get them anything they wanted. And so, of course, they would hang out with her because she was doing things for them. This left her constantly fighting for attention and affection and love through gifts, and she felt like this was the only way to find people who would be around her instead of looking for people who genuinely cared about her. As Regina went on to Austin, she did try to live in the moment. She would travel often. She didn't let life just pass her by, but she also had plans for the future of wanting to be with a partner and having kids. She really did want to be a mother and a wife, but Regina also wanted to experience as much life as she could before then. While she was partying or traveling, she would often bring her friends or her girlfriends, but on June 29th, she was actually at home in Austin, Texas, and there she would spend, her time with her dog, Spirit, and in her apartment. But that's when investigators were called to the scene of a fire around 9:34 p.m. They said that a Jeep was ablaze in the middle of nowhere. This was in Bastrop County. This was around 40 minutes away from Austin. And it was said that this fire was, definitely inside the Jeep, but it was quite a large fire. However, this road that it was located on was a road known for cars to be dumped and then set ablaze when they were stolen, and of course the perpetrators wanted to get rid of the evidence, so the fire department really did know what they were going to look for that day. It was just basically routine at this point. However, they would not be prepared for what they would find with this Jeep. This Jeep was said to have no license plate on it. The tires had already melted off, and upon looking around the scene, they actually did find the license plate kind of lying on the ground, and this was immediately sent in to be traced, of course, to the owner of the vehicle, and the license plate was actually RHV33H. There was also a very obvious trail of burnt grass going from the Jeep to the gasoline can, which made it pretty obvious that this car had been set on fire on purpose. Like I said, they were very used to all of this. So the fire was put out, and inside the Jeep they began inspecting everything to see if there was possibly any evidence as to who had done this, and that's when they started to find that there was very strange car seats in the back of the car, not like a child car seat, but like the actual leather car seat looked very odd. And so that's when they began to look a little closer. And that's when, to everyone's surprise, they realized it wasn't a car seat. It was a burnt body. It was so badly burnt that they could barely tell that it had once been a human. And as they slowly attempted to take the body off of the seat, they realized that the back wasn't as badly burned because it had been against the seat, and they also found something else in between the body and the seat. This was a rag that kind of was charred around the edges, but was mostly kept safe from the fire. And inside this rag was a knife. No matter how hard they were trying, though, they were unable to remove this body from the Jeep completely. And so in order to transport it to the medical examiner, investigators actually had to take the whole car seat out and take it in that way. The medical examiner then found that whoever this was in a fetal position. They had lost their arms, half of their legs, their ears, and their eyes in the fire, and they quickly identified it as a female due to the breast tissue in the, of course, chest region, but she had been burned severely, and it didn't appear she was actually burned alive due to there being nothing in her lungs. There weren't any bullet wounds when they started to look to see what the actual cause of death was. However, there were stab wounds, and these were deep and long and around the same size as the knife found behind the body's back. Now investigators needed to identify who this woman was, and they had been searching for the owner of the Jeep, and that is when they found a name. This was Regina Hartwell. Now, they immediately realized this was a woman whose life had been brutally taken, and her body had been disposed of in one of the worst ways possible. They couldn't officially identify her, though, because her body was so extremely charred. She also didn't have any dental records that could be, used. Her teeth were not available for that, and her fingerprints weren't as well. So they needed to find the next of kin, and they were having a very hard time with that. Now, they needed to find who did this and why. But meanwhile, some of Regina's friends who hadn't heard from her in a while, and of course weren't being contacted about this, had decided to head to her apartment to make sure she wasn't just there. The door was locked and no one answered, but they all knew she had a broken window, and so they could go through that and, check on her that way. So they all did. Her dog, Spirit, was in the bedroom, and he hadn't been fed or given water yet, and she was nowhere inside. Now, this was strange because her favorite pair of Doc Martens she wore every day were inside the home, as well as her makeup bag she took everywhere, and she literally would not leave her apartment without these things. They began to call hospitals as well as police stations to see if she was there, but this came back with no luck, and investigators had tried to actually call Regina's apartment to see if anybody would answer that was possibly her next of kin, because she didn't have any form of, family members that they could locate. And so that is when nobody answered, and they left a voicemail, but then they did get a call back. This was from a man named Jeremy Barnes, who asked if Regina was in jail. He was saying, you were calling, she must be in jail. I will pay the bail. Just tell me how much it is and where she's located. I'll come get her. That's when they had to inform him that his friend wasn't in jail. She was dead. And he was completely baffled, but he also couldn't identify her because he wasn't next of kin. He was in complete disbelief, and he was asked who he was to Regina because he was now their only suspect. Jeremy began to say he was just a friend who lived nearby who had gone to her apartment to check on her and to also clean the area. He had first gone in to get a dish she had borrowed from him, checked the voicemail, and saw that it was from the police station. The worst part was when investigators immediately said, okay, you need to leave the apartment, do not touch anything, this could be a crime scene, he told them he couldn't do that. He said he had already cleaned up the entire apartment. This had happened a few days prior, and there was nothing he could do to change that. Investigators told him to stay there. They rushed to the scene because Jeremy really was their prime suspect now. He was questioned as soon as he arrived. He was saying that Regina had told him that she would be away for a while. She often would leave and travel, and he would be the one to go in, clean her apartment, take care of her dog. And so when he arrived the few days prior, it was a complete disaster, but even more than usual. He said that there were kind of bloodied tampons everywhere, and he was used to that as well, so he was just kind of cleaning it up. Spirit had dug them out of the trash in the bathroom, so he was picking those up as well as cleaning up everything in the home, just to make sure when she came home to a clean place, and she would pay him when he would do this. Investigators told Jeremy to tell them everything he cleaned in that apartment that day, and he appeared very nervous while talking to them, and he said that he did clean up blood splatters. These were kind of on the bathroom above the toilet roll. It was also on the wall, the ceiling, the counter, and he also said he found a pool of blood in the living room under a recliner, and to clean that up as well with bleach. He said he thought Regina was just trying to hide the blood with a recliner, so he moved it and cleaned it for her anyways, because that's just how close of friends they were. Sure enough, investigators were picking up blood and bleach from the luminol tests that they were doing around the apartment in those exact locations. And when asked why he thought it was normal to go into somebody's home and clean up blood, he was saying that Regina would actually randomly get nosebleeds, and they were pretty bad, and she also hated cleaning up, so she would just leave them there. He also assumed that some other blood was from her period, since there were tampons in the trash. He said that since the apartment was still clean at the time that he'd come back a few days later, he knew she had never been there because it would not stay clean if she was in the apartment. But one of these investigators had actually already heard about Regina missing. He had just listened and not seemed to care. Jeremy had actually been one of 3 of Regina's friends, or actually there were 3 more friends, who had all been at the apartment trying to figure out what happened to her. And Jeremy had already been worried for the past 5 days because he did not know where she was. He hadn't heard from her, and that is when he was walking by her apartment that day, and he heard crying coming from inside, and he was like so excited because he thought Regina's finally home. I don't know why she's crying, but at least she's home, and he went in to check on his friend. He said that he immediately ran inside and found that it was not Regina crying. It was another woman standing in her bathroom trying to clean up the blood stain on the kitchen or on the bathroom counter that he had tried and been unsuccessful at cleaning up. She was sobbing, and when Jeremy came in, he told her to stop cleaning, and asked her why she was in the apartment. This was a woman named Kim LeBlanc, who Jeremy did know because she was one of Regina's friends. Now, then 2 more of Regina's friends also came to the apartment. They were all talking about how they hadn't spoken to her in a while, and this was just unusual for her to go without any communication at all. They had called all of her friends. Nobody knew where she was, so they decided to report her missing. However, before doing so, they did clean up her apartment from, the drugs that were inside, as well as the sex toys, because they didn't want the police to look at that and think of her as lesser than, therefore not wanting to investigate her possible disappearance. And so that is when they called for an investigator, and one came to the residence, asked a few questions, and one of which led to the reveal of a huge part of Regina's life. She was extremely wealthy. You see, I told you about her mother's accident when she was a child. However, I didn't tell you that because of that, her stepfather and her had received large amounts of money in the settlement. When Regina was a child, she received $400,000, and that was just the first installment. She would get nearly $3 million in total. When the investigator was told about this, he began to say that a woman with this type of money could just get up and leave everything behind and become a whole new person, never speak to anyone again. And so he thought that that is exactly what happened. She didn't want to be found, therefore he was going to do nothing about it. However, he did point out the blood that was seen in her apartment that they couldn't clean up. And then he left about an hour later. With no help from investigators, Regina's friends then decided to call one of Regina's longtime friends, who was also a beneficiary on her bank account. They wanted to see if she had been spending any money those past few days and could possibly lead them to a location. Now, this friend got back to them and said it turned out that hundreds of dollars has been taken out every day since Regina had been missing, and she also only had $8,000 in her bank account. Now, she would only get, certain amounts of money every year and up until she turned 25. So it's not like she had just $3 million sitting in there, but she definitely should have had more than $8,000 in there. Yet one of her friends knew exactly where this money was going, but we'll get back to this. Now, meanwhile, Jeremy, who is now being looked into as a suspect for cleaning up the bloodied apartment, was told that he couldn't identify her because he wasn't family. He also was told he was going to be questioned for her disappearance and murder. So the burnt body remained unidentified. They weren't sure if this was even Regina, if this was even a murder at all. But in the meantime, investigators closed her bank account completely. One thing they noticed while questioning Jeremy was that he was extremely apologetic. He was saying he would have never cleaned up the apartment if he knew it was a crime scene. He was just trying to help his friend. He thought the blood was normal. It didn't even cross his mind that it could be something that would tamper with evidence. And so he did not believe she was in danger. He admitted to them about the bag of drugs and sex toys they had removed from her apartment and exactly where to find it, what trash can they put it in. And he didn't appear to be a killer. He appeared to be a grieving friend. However, problem is, psychopaths can appear that way. So you can't really take that at face value. But Jeremy had also told them a story about Regina's love life that intrigued them a bit, so much so that they believed it could be a motive. You see, Regina was a lesbian. She had really embraced that side of her, that truth about her while she was in high school. And so she was out meeting girls at bars when she moved to Austin. She was so extremely happy to just be living and not having to hide anything about herself. And so in June of the year prior, in 1994, she had met a beautiful 18-year-old who had moved there to go to the University of Texas. This was at a Club 404, which was a gay bar, and Regina thought she was the one. There was this instant spark. Regina absolutely thought that this girl was going to be her next girlfriend, and she was right. For months they did drugs together, they partied quite a bit, and they began a relationship. Regina was completely in love. But Regina had grown up with all this money, and so from a young age she believed that that is what made someone care about her, how much she could buy for them. This was kind of ingrained in her when she was 16 years old and her stepfather left her to be alone in the home and he moved away. And when CPS was called, they said, oh, well, she has enough money. She can take care of herself. You know, she has a car, she has a home. The home was paid off and she can use that car to get to school. So as long as she goes to school, there's no problem here. So she thought, oh, well, I guess money does buy everything. That's when I believe Regina began to see that, you know, money could take care of you when no one else did. And so, like I said, her high school friends were kind of like leeches to her bank account more than friends, and she would throw those parties. And so eventually she turned from doing those things to her friends to doing those things in relationships. And when she found someone she liked, she'd give them the world. Literally the world, as she traveled around, paid for everything, gave them gifts, and they had access to it all, including her bank accounts. That's exactly what she was giving her new girlfriend as well. She bought her a scooter, a car, she paid for her rent, she took her on tropical vacations with her friends, like the girlfriend's friends. And there was no level that Regina wasn't willing to go to for love, because she was really in love with Kim LeBlanc. That's right. Her friend, found crying in her apartment, was actually her girlfriend. But they weren't really in a relationship at the time of her disappearance. You see, Jeremy had told investigators that a few months prior to this, they had been in the Bahamas together, paid for, of course, by Regina. And that is when Kim suddenly told Regina that she couldn't do it anymore. Regina was confused, and Kim told her that she wasn't really a lesbian, that she didn't love her like that. She loved her more like a sister, and they broke up. However, they did remain to be in each other's lives. And this wasn't the end of the story. Because while Regina still believed there was a chance for a rekindled romance, Kim was moving on. But was she really? Because when it came to finances, Regina was still paying for everything, including her rent. But Kim was bringing over a man to her place every night. She had realized that she hadn't been with a man since high school, and she wanted to be with a guy. So while she was working at a gym as a receptionist, she had come across this idea that she was going to date the next man who came across her desk. And so when a man did, she began to get with him, to date him. Little did she know this random stranger, so she thought, had quite a lot in common with her ex-girlfriend or the girl she was still stringing along. But Jeremy, or the man who was informing investigators of everything, was also saying that he was a gay man himself, and that he always believed from the very beginning that Kim was never a lesbian, never believed to be a lesbian, but only used Regina for her money. And so, hearing this, investigators did begin searching for Kim LeBlanc. They told Jeremy to page her. Yes, page her. This was in the 1990s. He asked her to meet him at Regina's apartment, but she never showed. That is when inside of Regina's apartment they found a phone number, and this led them to Kim, and then she was talking to them and came down to the police station after hearing about all of this. When she was told about Regina's possible murder, she began sobbing uncontrollably, appeared distraught. But the one thing that she could come up with as to why this would have happened was that Regina did drugs, and it could have something to do with her drug problem. According to Kim, Regina not only did drugs, but she was in the drug trade and she sold them. When investigators began asking Regina's friends if there was anybody who was, a dealer to her that would have been capable of murder, they all could come up with one name, and that was Justin Thomas. This man was located in his home and he wasn't there, but he was found inside his family home right next to Kim LeBlanc. Now, in fact, that's how they found him, was through figuring out where Kim was. Because Justin Thomas was the man she had randomly found at the gym and began dating. And at this point, neither of them appeared to be in their right mind. The drug use had completely consumed them, and they appeared to be in a horrible condition. It turned out the three of them, Justin, Kim, and Regina, had been hanging out a lot prior to this. They would do drugs together, yet every night Kim would go home with Justin and sleep with him instead of Regina. And this made Regina upset. But she had come up with a plan. She told Kim she was going to pay for her to go on vacation with her. And this was to Cancun. And so they went on this trip alone. But while on this trip, Regina began to realize that she was losing Kim, that she wasn't loving her the same way she used to. But the problem was she was still financially responsible for Kim in every way and didn't want her to feel like she was taking that away from her. And she was telling her, don't worry about it. I will still pay for everything for you no matter what. But she still wanted Kim's love. Once they got back home and they went their separate ways, Regina did call Kim at her home and apologize to her. But she also heard Justin mouthing off in the background about her. And that's when everything changed. Regina told Kim to put Justin on the phone, and that's when she told Justin that he was bad for Kim. She was going to turn him into the cops about all the drugs that he would deal. This was the day before the murder. Regina had also called a friend in law enforcement who was in narcotics and basically said that she wanted to bust Justin. She had said, "I'm sick and tired of him, and this time he crossed the line. He's demanding that Kim spend more time with him, and she's already spending way too much time with the mother effing son of a bee." Now, investigators, of course, believe this could be a motive, and they found Justin, and they saw damning evidence in the form of a Band-Aid on his hand. This was an actual bandage, not just a Band-Aid. He was severely bleeding, and he said he just jumped a fence and cut his hand. They were both brought in for questioning, and Kim actually asked for a lawyer, but then said she would talk anyways, and she began talking right away. She said that Justin, over this phone call, was saying that he was going to kill Regina. Kim said she didn't think this was serious, but the next day he went to her apartment, climbed in through that broken window, and found Regina sleeping on a chair. She woke up to him over her and said, "What up, Jay?" And that's when he basically told her to take back what she said about going to investigators, and she didn't want to do that. That's when he began stabbing her in the neck. It was believed she drowned in her own blood. Justin then took her to the bathtub where the blood was draining out, and he came home with bloodied hands to Kim. She was horrified, yet she realized what he'd done, and she helped Justin take Regina's body that was wrapped up in a blanket, put it in her Jeep, and set it on fire. After this, they used Regina's debit card to stay in a hotel and give themselves makeovers in case anyone had seen them dispose of the body. Upon hearing this, investigators did head to the hotel, and there was a cleaning lady who said, "Yeah, I remember them. There was blood all over their towels. There was hair, and there was hair dye, like they had cut and colored their hair." And she could also point out a picture of Justin as being the man there because she was so scared of how he looked. At this point, they were both arrested, charged with murder, but this wasn't the end, and it also wasn't the last victim that we're going to talk about. You see, Kim was released because the charges against her had been dropped. This was because a judge ruled since she wasn't given a lawyer, her confession couldn't be used against her. She would be able to testify against Justin, though, which gave her immunity. During the trial, which was a year later in 1996, for Justin, Kim did take the stand. She appeared to be completely sober, and she asked if she felt bad about taking the money from Regina all those times. She said, "Yeah, in the beginning, because I've never been around anybody with a lot of money, and in the end, because I realized I wasn't a lesbian, and yeah, that was the source of a lot of discussions between her and I." When she was asked, "Well, why did you continue taking money from her?" she said, "Because I didn't want to go back home." She then admitted that she knew that Justin was going to kill Regina that day, and that was because Justin had basically told her that he was going to do what Kim had asked him to do, and that was to get Regina out of her life. But when Justin took the stand, he was saying that it was Kim who was the one who killed Regina, and he helped her dispose of the body. He claimed that Kim had always said that she wished she never got involved with Regina and was often angry with her, but that August, Justin was sentenced to life in prison anyway. However, investigators then began to look into Justin for another murder. This had happened 3 years prior to Regina's murder in 1992 in California. You see, that September, a man named Rafael Norija was shot to death in Moreno Valley. A witness came forward. Her name was Dorothy Brown, who was Justin's girlfriend at the time. She said that she saw Justin shoot Rafael, and Dorothy had apparently told investigators this years ago, But since they had no physical evidence against Justin, they could do nothing about it. But now Kim was also saying that Justin had told her about the murder of Raphael as well. This was said to happen during a drug deal where Justin thought Raphael was an informant, and so Justin was actually charged with first-degree murder of Raphael and was sentenced to death. He is still currently on death row at San Quentin State Prison, but it's said that Justin grew up doing drugs very early in his life, and it eventually led him to be rejected from all of his football scholarships. That was like the one thing that he did well for, and so this eventually led him to a life of crime and drugs. It was rumored that he also may have been a hitman for the Mexican mafia. Kim, on the other hand, was said to have a mother and stepfather growing up, and when she got to be a teenager, her stepfather decided to tell her that she needed to learn how to pleasure her future husband, and he began to sexually assault her. And he was extremely toxic, manipulative, telling her how her mother would die without him, and so she couldn't tell on him because then they would have nothing. She was also a cheerleader, and during her senior year, she wasn't picked as cheer captain, so she ended up quitting the squad, and she would start harassing the other cheerleaders. She would vandalize their homes and their cars, and she began to be an all-around dark individual. It said this is when she started doing drugs. She cut off all her hair. But after all of the murder charges against Kim were dropped, she changed her name, and her whereabouts are unknown. But Regina's friend Jeremy, the one who was initially thought to be a suspect, who really just turned out to be a loving, kind friend, is heartbroken that she's gone, but he wants everyone to know that she will never be forgotten. He will never forget her. Now, I cannot believe this case isn't more widely known. Other than the amazing book by Susie Spencer and the podcast, there's very little sources and articles about Regina's murder. So I do hope that I did a good job, and I hope that you learned about her, and I hope I could bring you a case that you hadn't heard before. Let me know what you think about this case down below. But go ahead and check out Best Fiends down below. It's completely free to download with a link down below. And if you just need a few moments to relax and get your mind off of everything else happening in your life, it's a great way to do so. But don't ever forget to speak up. Your voice is powerful enough, and I love you to absolute pieces. Okay? Bye.